A happy Friday afternoon to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining us as we are continuing our walk through history. This past Tuesday, we read through 1 Samuel chapter 4 and read about the defeat that Israel suffered at the hands of the Philistines, and that they were defeated originally at the beginning of the chapter, and then they wondered about themselves. Why did the Lord defeat us at the hands of the Philistines today? And in their minds, well, if we want to make sure that doesn't happen again, let's bring his ark into the battle. And if we bring his ark, which is a representation of his relationship with us, a representation of his power that is seen through us, it's helped us before at the Jordan, it's helped us before at Jericho, then surely this will force God to help us again today. Things didn't exactly go according to plan for them. They're defeated again, and even more severe beatdown they suffered, so much so that the priest, Hophni and Phinehas, were killed in battle. And then the news of that spread throughout Israel, and eventually Eli dies whenever he hears of the ark being captured. And then Phinehas' wife goes into labor upon hearing about what takes place. And she names her son Ichabod, and her view is probably the view of everyone within Israel at this time, that the glory has departed from Israel because the ark of God has been captured. So we're kind of left on a cliffhanger here. What's going to happen with the ark? What is God going to do with this incredibly important piece of Israel's history? And again, a representation of their relationship with God. What is God going to do with his ark being captured? Well, that's what we're going to see today in 1 Samuel chapter 5. Again, thank you for being here with us in this study. Joining us, as always, is my good friend, Alan Siedenstrang, and he is going to, in just a moment, whenever he is ready, he's going to read this text for us, and we'll see exactly what God is going to do, even though he's kind of out of pocket at the moment. Even though his representation is out of pocket, that's not going to show God powerless at all, though. Alan, good to see you, bud.
Yeah, it's definitely, this is almost a humorous passage, just showing how just how mighty God is compared to this Philistine god Dagon. It's kind of it's almost refreshing because I mean he's I feel like we've spent the past two books or so showing how little the Israelites regarded God, and now it's kind of nice to see the Lord kind of winning in a way here. Verse 1 starts off with, after the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod, brought it into the temple of Dagon, and placed it next to his statue. When the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. But when they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon, fallen from his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. This time, Dagon's head and both of his hands were broken off and lying on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso remained. That is why, still today, the priest of Dagon and everyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod do not step on Dagon's threshold. The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod. He terrified the people of Ashdod and its territory and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, "The ark of Israel's God must not stay here with us, because his hand is strongly against us and our God Dagon." So they called all the Philistine rulers together and asked, "What should we do with the ark of Israel's God?" "The ark of Israel's God should be moved to Gath," they replied. So they moved the ark of Israel's God. And after they had moved it, the Lord's hand was against the city of Gath, causing a great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, with an outbreak of tumors. The people of Gath then sent the ark of God to Ekron. But when they got there, the Ekronites cried out, "They moved the ark of Israel's God to kill us and our people." The Ekronites called all the Philistine rulers together. They said, "Send the ark of Israel's God away. Let it return to its place so it won't kill us and our people." For the fear of death pervaded the city. God's hand was oppressing them. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven.
Well, they might have had a victory, Alan, with the capture of the ark, but for the Philistines, things did not continue to go well with them once they bring the ark into the temple of Dagon. Number one, I want to ask you, why would they do this? And number two, did things go according to plan?
Well, I mean, they do this. This is pretty common. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure that later on, when we read about Nebuchadnezzar, I'll have to double check. When we read about Nebuchadnezzar and his defeat of and capture of Israel, a lot of the tokens and things from the gold and the silver and the plates and cups and all that stuff was taken and put into the temple of his god. So this is a common practice back then, that you capture all of the uh, important things, and then you bring it as an offering to Dagon. So I mean, there's no way to take this ark and divvy it up and pay the soldiers or anything. So this is a perfect item to use as an offering to their god for their victory. And just if you think about it, if people are coming and they visit the temple of Dagon and then they see all of these other gods, treasured items, well, clearly they were captured in battle. I mean, that's just an extra thing to show the power and the might of your God. So it makes sense that they would take that and place it in his temple, to the side there. But obviously, it doesn't go as planned. Time after time, they'd come in, and Dagon. I love the way it's written. Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. It doesn't just say that the idol or Dagon had fallen down. It was he'd fallen on his face before the Lord. So that's obviously a little more, gives us a sense that Dagon was the one bowing down to the Lord,
Right.
not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, going back to what you're saying, Alan, you're thinking about Nebuchadnezzar. Second Chronicles 36 and verse 7. Whenever let's see here, whenever verse 5, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. Now King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked him and bound him in bronze shackles to take him to Babylon. Also Nebuchadnezzar took some of the articles of the Lord's temple to Babylon and put them in the temple in Babylon. So that was a correct thinking that you had, that was something that took place. And as you said, that was something that was common practice whenever you had victory over someone else in a battle during this time, because people didn't see battles just as earthly battles. They also saw these as supernatural battles, spiritual battles that are taking place between the gods of the nations. That if we had victory over you, then that meant that our God was stronger than your God. So in the side of the Philistines, again, if we go back, and we didn't mention this on Tuesday, but at least we didn't mention it specifically, but whenever they were terrified of the ark coming into the camp of Israel, and they understood this as a representation of Israel's God, or gods coming to Israel, that terrified them because they had heard the stories of what Israel's gods had done to Egypt whenever they were experiencing, whenever the Exodus was taking place, that they understood the might of Egyptian gods. That's why they were so powerful. Well, here is this god or these gods coming in on behalf of Israel, and they overtook Egypt and they punished Egypt severely through the plagues. And in their minds, and in the minds of everybody reading this at this time, that is spiritual warfare. And that is Israel's God or gods being stronger than the gods of these other nations and peoples. So here, the conclusion that must have been drawn by the Philistines is our God, Dagon, is greater than Israel's God or gods. And here we're taking this as a trophy. This is a sign of our God being greater than their gods, which, as you mentioned, people come in, they see this, they're saying, oh, okay, these are basically scalps. These are trophies of war that they have gained through defeating these other people. So here, basically, the ark and the god or gods of Israel, they're being put here on the trophy case. And yeah, as you said, God here is going to show that that's not what it's happening at all. It's not that Dagon is stronger than me. It's that the Lord allowed this to happen because people thought that they could manipulate God. Going back to chapter 4, they thought they could push God's hand. But what God is showing here in chapter 5 is that he doesn't need people. That, number one, from chapter 4, you're not going to force my hand. But number two, I don't need people to act on behalf of me, myself. God is saying I can handle myself just fine. And he does that through the first example is their idol falling, as you said, face down before him. Here is an idol bowing down before the Ark of the Covenant, this representation of God and his relationship with his people. Well, now, the second time they do it, he doesn't just fall down, but now he explodes. He falls apart. And that just shows the complete and total superiority of God, of Yahweh, over the gods of the Philistines, Dagon, and others who might have been present within their theology of their understanding of the supernatural. But it didn't in there, did it, Alan? It continued on outside of Dagon's temple, for God's power was not only seen in causing that piece of material to fall down, but it was also seen in his power over the people. Remember that they were worried about the plagues and the things that happened in Egypt back in chapter 4. Well, now not that wasn't just something they had to think about, but now that's going to be something they have to deal with themselves, in thinking that they had power over God and that they had somehow forced God to bow down before their own gods.
Yeah, just some highlights here. I love this little phrase at the end of chapter 3. We're talking about just
Oh yes,
misunderstanding of
yeah,
the items of the Israelites. They took the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh and brought it to battle, and the Philistines took the ark. They thought they were the ones manipulating God. Well, look at Dagon. I mean, he falls down, so they have to pick him up.
oh,
I
that's
mean,
right.
just a literary reminder. By the way, this is a big stone statue.
Mhm.
This is an inanimate object. This is nothing. And then one repeating word you'll see throughout this whole text is hands. You see it here where Dagon, the second time he falls, his head and both of his hands were broken
Mhm.
and lying on the threshold. Well, you know, Dagon, this non-existent God statue. I mean, his hands were broken before God, but the true God that lives, his hand was heavy on the people of
Yep.
Ashdod. And then later on, let's see, I think it says the same thing with the next people. The hand of God was against Gath and all that. God's hand right here in verse 9 was against the city of Gath. So God's hands are actually doing something, whereas Dagon's hands are broken off of its
Mhm.
fake body. So again, it's comical almost, in the sense. I mean, I think we're supposed to see the humor in trying to equate God and Dagon, or try to put Dagon above God, when God is, the Lord is the Lord is living, the Lord is, whereas Dagon is just a false idol here.
Verse
And of
11 as well
course,
has that, Alan.
yeah.
God's
And
hand
then
oppressing them.
yep. And then of course, they're afflicted with tumors. That obviously has some fun parallels to the boils upon the skin of the Egyptians, and of course, and that's one of the things that God promised would afflict the Israelites if they turned against him. So he uses the same type of plague, and it must have been more than that. It talks about um, in verse 12, those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went to. So those people were dying of other things, I think, besides just the tumors. The tumors were killing him, but it seemed like there was more than just that. That was just the main thing. And their outcry went all the way up to heaven, and you have this comical scene of this, like, oh, we don't want the ark. It's like a hot potato between the cities of the cities here. I'll pull up this map again so we can see it. The battle takes place up here between Aphek and Ebenezer, was the Israelite camp, and then these main cities down here: Ashdod,
Did you pull it up,
Ekron,
Alan?
Gath.
I'm not
Yeah,
seeing it on the screen. I'm seeing the text still.
oh, yeah, sorry. Here, I'll share it. There we go.
There we go.
Better. All right.
Yes.
So yeah, Aphek and Ebenezer was where the battle took place, and they moved that ark down to those kind of central cities: Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, and pass those along, and then eventually it'll get returned to Israel. All these other Gaza and Ashkelon. I'm sure they're glad they didn't get involved with all that.
That's right.
But yeah, like I said, it's just a hot potato. They're passing it from
Mhm.
one place to the other, and the same thing's happening. all the way through the end of the chapter. So it's just it's like the 10 plagues against Egypt all over again. They're finally they think they can keep it, but they don't want it in their city. They pass it along. The final city is like, oh, I mean, we've already heard about it. We don't even want it to come here, so send it away. So they finally, just like Pharaoh, he finally let the people go. So when it finally gets to Ekron, there's like, get it out of here, send it back to Israel. We don't want it anymore.
That's right, and that's a great theme that you found here in chapter 5, being the hand. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
hands of Dagon being broken off. He has no power, and yet here is God. His hand is heavy. His hand is against. His hand is oppressing these people, and that again is showing that God is able to accomplish what He wants to accomplish without us. He does not need to have us in order to show His power, and that should leave us in a position where we are purely appreciative of the opportunity to be used by God to accomplish various things that He would have us to accomplish. And that's something that Davis brings up in his commentary that I thought was really good. He mentions this. I'll read from his commentary, page 61. The danger is that contemporary Christians may think that they are not dim-witted pagans, and so naturally such matters of humorous and historical interest have nothing to do with them. So thinking that this particular idea of the physical representations, we're beyond that. Well, there's still issues. That the church has its own paganizing mind. What are we to say of songs that croon, "Somehow He needed me"? What about the poetic ditties that speak of God's having no hands but our hands, no feet but our feet, to do His will? He says, I know there's an element of truth in such sentiments, but it's largely buried. What of lyrics of our hymns? Rise up, O men of God, His kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and in the night of wrong. He said it's very stirring, and but probably too cocky. I'm not saying that we should cease serving Yahweh with all of our might, but that we must be aware of Christian arrogance that casts Yahweh in Dagon's image. The God of the Bible does not need us. I'll stop right there. He doesn't need us. He did not need anyone to show His power in this chapter. Notice, there's not a single Israelite that I can find in this chapter. There's not a single worshiper of God that I can find in this chapter. In this chapter, it is God, it is Yahweh versus Dagon and the people of the Philistines in all these different cities. No one is having to act on behalf of God. God alone is taking care of His business. Yet, let me finish what is in here. Here's the good news. I did not say He does not want us. So here's what we need to understand, and what I think is really the lesson that we take away from this chapter, is that God does not need us. He is all sufficient on His own. He is not contingent. His power is not contingent on us carrying out His will. He can accomplish it on His own. But at the same time, He desires to partner with us. He desires to use us to proclaim His glory to this world. Yet at the same time, so all these things are happening. All these thoughts can be true at once. He does not need us, yet He wants us. Yet if we reject participating in His will, that doesn't thwart God. He's still going to get his will accomplished in some way. And we see that here within the chapter. He did not have to have someone else acting on His behalf. He was going to do that on His own. And really, He was forced to do that on His own, in a sense, because His people were very ungodly. They were very paganistic in their own understanding of Him and His ark. And that's what has led Him to this moment. He's going to show these people, He's going to show the Philistines, listen, I'm not like your gods. I'm not like them at all. I have real power. I don't need that. As you mentioned, and I thought it was really good you mentioned this, they had to return Dagon to his place. He's saying, I don't need people to return me to my place. In fact, I've never been moved from my place. I will do what I need to. He is really going to get himself back home. In a sense, this representation of His power, He's going to get it back to where it needs to be. He doesn't need others to do it. He's going to force them to do it himself. Alan, what do you have on this chapter to close us out for our study today?
Couple things I can't help but think of the prayer of that Christ, as he's teaching the Israelites, says, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." When he's teaching his disciples, uh, God's will be done.
Mm-hmm.
I think he wanted to afflict and punish the Philistines, but because Israel was not doing what's right, they couldn't join in with that, and
They
that's
could
why
not
they
be
were
used.
they
They
could
could
not
not
be
be
the ones
because they're,
used.
yeah.
But so I love how these two chapters, chapter 4 with the defeat of Israel, and then chapter 5 and 6 with the defeat of the Philistines here, line up next to each other, because God was also he was wanting to punish the people of Israel as well, because they were not doing right. If they had been doing right, then I think they would have had victory at that battle of Aphek. But because they were not, their their morals and their will wasn't aligned with God, they lost. And then, again, God's will was still done, just in a interesting, fun way. But and then this is actually going to contrast when we get to next week to chapter 7, where we have Samuel reintroduced again, and they actually do have victory against the Philistines, because their will, or the will of God, actually lines up with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's our job and our focus to make sure that our lives and what we want lines up with what God wants as well. And if it doesn't, then um, be prepared. God's will is going to be done. If we're wanting something else, well, we're going to have to deal with defeat just like the Israelites did. So it's better to just, you know, not keep going down that path to defeat, but change our mindset, change our focus, change what we think is important. Sometimes prayer will do that. We pray for something, and then it becomes clear that we were praying for the wrong thing, and God's will was taking us in a different direction. So we don't just keep praying and keep, hoping that God changes his mind. We need to adjust our mindset and focus on what's most important to God, what's in line with his will and his desire for us, and change ourselves, because God is not going to change his will, and he shouldn't. His will is supreme. His knowledge is unsurpassed, so he knows what's best.
Right.
We need to adjust our prayers and our mindset and our lives to line up with his will.
Yeah, we're going from the previous chapter where the people thought they could manipulate and twist God to doing what they wanted him to do, when that is the exact opposite of what ought to be done. We ought to recognize ourselves as being the clay, and God as being the potter, the one who wants to shape, who not only desires but has the right to shape us into what he would have us to be. I think that's a great point, Alan. I think that message is seen very clearly in these two chapters when we put them together, that God is sovereign, and he is going to accomplish his will. He's not going to be manipulated by others. And in fact, if we don't want to participate with him in the fulfilling of his desires, then he can take care of it on his own, and he will make sure that his will is certainly accomplished. Hope that those thoughts remain with you today as you go throughout the rest of this day on this Friday, and as we move into the weekend and the Lord's Day this upcoming Sunday. God is sovereign. His will be done. And we ought to be thankful that he desires to allow us to participate with him in accomplishing that will. And yet, if we're not going to, he's still going to get it done one way or the other. Thank you for joining us. Hope this has been a blessing to you. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and hope you'll join us next time as we get into chapter 6. We're gonna read about the ark's return back to the people of God in 1 Samuel chapter 6. We'll do that on Tuesday, 3:15 here on the Pleasant Plains Church of Christ Facebook page, and also on the Walking Through History YouTube channel. Hope you'll join us for that study, and that'll be a blessing to you as well. Again, have a great rest of your day. God bless you, and we'll see you next time as we continue our walk through history. God bless.